Well, hey guys, welcome to today's video. Today it is mid-December and this is what we're working on in the nursery this time of year. So I want to make a video today that's kind of an A to Z, beginning to end, the entire process of propagating, growing, and selling Green Giant Arborvitaes, what the entire things look like, what the whole process looks like. This is one of the kind of bread and butter plants that we have in our nursery. It's one of the two most important plants that we have that we grow and sell the most of. So I want to show you the entire process today. So if learning about propagating, growing, and selling green giants seems interesting to you, then I encourage you to jump in today and let's go for a little ride and let's see how we do this. Now to start the process, I have some Green Giant Arborvitaes that are planted right here. I have 14 of them that I've planted right here in a bed. These have been here for almost about 2 years, and they were, just this big or so when I first planted them here. I think they were 3-gallon size, but I planted these here specifically for the purpose of taking cuttings from them. There's no other reason that I have these. So each winter when I do this now, I cut them back real hard. I mean, I don't leave much here at all, just a bunch of little green stems standing up. And I'm gonna cut these things way back. There's not gonna be a lot left here. So what I'm looking for on these, this looks more like a bush than a green giant tree, but it's because I sheared it back so hard this time last year. But what I'm looking for is new growth. I want growth that came in this previous growing season. Remember, it's December and we're talking, the growth that started in May. So, which is pretty much everything that you see here. So I come in and, you don't worry about the top leaders, you just cut all of it. So I just come in and, for example, I take this top branch and I just cut that out. And there's a bunch of really nice cuttings right there just on that branch alone. I mean, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and some of these you can probably get 2 out of, and I'll show you that up a little bit closer here in just a minute. But let's just say conservatively that you have 5 right here. It's more than that, but let's just say that it's 5. I'm going to just take these branches and just cut them one after another, and I'm cutting them down hard. I mean, almost all the way to the main trunk, because I don't want this to just get bigger and bigger over time. I want to cut it all the way back so it does basically this same thing for next year. It'll just be thicker. So then I'm taking another branch about like that and cut it. And I'll just do several of these to just start collecting my cuttings. And by the time I go through all of these, I don't know, this may be a couple of thousand or more cuttings. And I'm not going to do all of that all at once because that's going to take me multiple days or even weeks to get all of this done. But I want to just show you on the video today my process. So we're going to start by just taking the cuttings from this year's growth. So I've come in here to my table and I've gotten some of these branches that I make my cuttings from, and I want to just show you how I do this because this is not hard at all. Remember, this is just one of those tip cuttings that stuck up, new growth, so new year's growth. So let's take these larger branches and cut them off, and I may look at that and that you could just make one really big cutting out of that if you wanted to. I'm not going to do that, but you could do that. I'm going to take this and turn this long one into 2 cuttings. So all I do is something like that and then strip all the growth off of the bottom so you've got a bare stem down here. I like to cut some of that top growth off of there. And if you'll take a look at this up close, you see some scarring that takes place, or it's more like a wound. When I tear those off, when I tear those little pieces of green off on the stem there, and this is where your roots are going to come from. So if you're working with a piece of cutting that doesn't have that, you can just scratch it with your thumbnail or something like that, and that makes a nice place for your roots to come out. So that's just an example of one cutting there. So I'm just going to keep going here. The piece that I just cut off is, here's the top of it. I'm doing the same thing. Strip off the bottom. And there you go, you have a nice cutting, and I like to just cut the excess off, although that one really doesn't need it. And you just got a nice cutting there, and from one little branch off of one little stem there, you have 2 cuttings. They're not identical to each other. The one from the tip will grow out a little bit faster. This wood's a little bit harder here. This is early in the season's growth, but these will both be really nice cuttings to start with. Now, just a little trick that I have learned is it's a really amazing thing about the Green Giant. This is what's left over of the cuttings, but there's still a lot of green on here. And you got all these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's probably 20 more of these little, I'll just call that a little branch on here, that you can use for cuttings. And if you don't have a lot of material, you know, if you're limited on material to make cuttings from, you know, if you've only got material for 20 plants and you'd like to make 200, all of these little branches will work too. But let me show you something about these. These are going to root not nearly as well as the others, though they will root. I've rooted a lot of them, but you can feel this with your hand. I know that you can't really see that, but you can feel that with your hand when you pinch these. And the center of that structure there, that center part of that, whatever that's called, it's flat. And I mean it's flat like paper is flat. And it's like, just for lack of a better term, because I don't know what the actual term is, it hasn't really grown and beefed up good yet. All these cuttings that I'm taking, when you feel that center part right there, it's round. It's more like a pencil, and I don't mean it's not as thick as a pencil, but when they're flat like this, they will root. It's just going to take more time. So it's just worth mentioning that there are so many cuttings that can be rooted from these Green Giants, but I try to focus on the ones that have more of a round feel to them, that are just a little bit thicker than these that are so flat. So that may be something that's worth mentioning. Now the next thing that I'm going to do after I make my actual cuttings is here's an example of my cuttings. I've got a dish pan of them over here. There's about, I don't know, 90 to 100 of them in here. I can't get quite that many in this pan. If I put them in there real tight, I could, but I like to get about 70 to 80 in each one of my pans. And I just use dish pans from the dollar store for this. You can use whatever you have. If you got scrap lumber laying around, you can just make you a little flat like this that has some holes in the bottom of it. You just always got to make sure that these drain, because these just are going to sit outside, and I'll talk more about that later. But I like to take my cuttings, and the medium that I use is, all this is a mixture of sand and pine bark. Now, the two guys who I learned how to propagate like this from, primarily Mike Kincaid. Mike Kincaid, he's got a YouTube channel. He puts his cuttings directly into fir bark. Well, I don't have fir bark in my area. I have pine bark, and pine bark just seems a little bit too dry to me. And the other person that I learned this from is Mike McGroarty, and Mike uses pure sand. Well, I don't use pure bark and I don't use pure sand. So what I use is just a mixture of the two. And the reason that I do that is because I do them in these pans, and a few times a year, either when I'm getting ready to dig them out, or if I just need to shuffle my operation around a little bit, I need to move these around. Well, when these are full of wet sand and plants, these things are really heavy. So I don't use pure sand because it just weighs a lot. But if all you have is pure sand, just find a coarse sand like play sand or something like that, masonry sand, anything that's not just like flour. You know, like you don't want bunker sand like for your sand bunkers on your golf course. But you can use sand or whatever that drains well and holds some moisture. The point is that I'm trying to make is, people ask me this a lot. They want to know exactly what I use to root these in, and there's not a magic sauce for this. You can do this 1,000 different ways, and I've rooted these directly in my own potting soil before, and that worked fine. So use what you have to make for your medium that you're going to put your cuttings in. You just got to make sure that it doesn't hold water, like water's not ponding on top of it. It needs to drain down through it, but it also needs to be something that doesn't dry out in 5 minutes either. It needs to maintain some moisture, and it needs to drain well. So those are the two properties that you're looking for in order to have a good medium for rooting Green Giant cuttings really well. Now the next thing that I'm going to do, I just take a stick, and I just take my stick and just poke holes in here. And I try to get about 75 or 80 of these in my trays. Now that number doesn't work out perfect, and I don't really care, you know, if it works out perfect or not. But I've got my cuttings that I've made, and I just stick them in. It doesn't really matter how deep you stick them in. Don't get hung up on that. You know, people always want to get hung up on exactly this and exactly that. How many inches did you stick those in there? And, you know, exactly how many inches long are your cuttings? And it really doesn't matter, guys, and I can't stress that enough. Just kind of understand the process that I'm going through here. And I'm going to just take my stick and poke more holes. You can use a screwdriver or a stick. If your medium's kind of soft, you can use your finger, use whatever you want. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I've put 10 or 11 holes in there, I don't even know. And it doesn't matter that much. And then I stick these in here like this, and I just do it until I use up all my cuttings or my space is full. In my case, I'm going to be going through a lot of these pans, dozens of these pans filled. We're going to do thousands of these. But I'm just going to kind of show you guys what this looks like today, and you just keep doing this until you get your tray full. So, you know, it's not something that you want to overthink, but you do want to just make sure you're doing a couple of things, paying attention to some details. So anyway, that's kind of how I start this process, and now I'm going to go and just fill this whole pan up, and then we'll do the next step. So then, taking the rest of the cuttings from this particular branch is just a matter of clipping off the rest of the propagatable material and then sticking them in the pan. Just make pretty quick work of it. Don't overthink it, one at a time. All right, so I've got those stuck in here, and this turned out to be about 70 in here. I actually want to put them just a little bit tighter than that in here, but there's about 70 that end up being in this one. So I just like to have a good idea of how many cuttings that I have. So the next thing we're going to do with this might surprise you, so let's go to the next step. Now the last thing to do with these cuttings is sit them here and leave them here. Now, I know that you guys sometimes are expecting that there's more to it than that, but there's really not. So all I've done is I've taken, after I stuck all these in here, I took my water hose and just soaked this in, just to settle all that bark and all that sand, just to settle it down in there real good. And it's just going to sit here. Now you may notice that I'm sitting under a shade house right here. This is about a 50% shade cloth over me throughout the winter. That won't make any difference at all. But when the weather starts to warm up next spring, the shade cloth makes a huge difference on the success of these cuttings. So we've got a lot of work to do in here this winter as far as clearing out all this area behind us and repotting some of this stuff, and there's just a lot going on in here. But what we'll do is we'll move a lot of that out, and we'll move a lot of this in, and we'll just leave these sitting under here all through the winter, into next spring, into next summer, and they're just going to sit here, and they'll take rain, they'll take our regular irrigation. They will, you know, this winter, if we get snow or ice, they'll just sit out here in the snow and ice. They never get covered. We don't do anything to them, but just sit out here. So after they just sit here, what I want to do now is I want to jump forward an entire year. So let's jump forward from December of this year, or December right now, to December a year from now. And then let's get an idea of what we might expect these cuttings to look like after they've sat out here in the weather, under the shade, for an entire 12 months. Let's see where they are. Now, here we are with a tray, just like the one I just showed you, stuck exactly like I just showed you, cuttings exactly, everything exactly the same. And these were exactly 1 year ago right now. Made these last December, last January, just any time in the winter. It was completely fine. And you can see how much growth they've put on and how many there are in here. I'm actually going to pull these out and count them and see how we did. So, but I want to take these out of here and just show you how this would look. So what I did with these, exactly like I showed you, left them sitting in the shade for a good part of the summer. Once they were rooted really well, I took them out of the shade and I just put them out in the sun with all of my other plants, and that's really where you get all this growth from. Put a little bit of slow release fertilizer in the pan, like a tablespoon or two in the pan, and didn't do anything else to them. I just put them in my irrigated area with all my other plants, and they've been sitting out there since probably about July, if I had to guess. So then what I do this time of year again is just kind of, you know, push from the bottom just to loosen that up. I'm just going to pull this whole pile of trees, small green giant trees, out of there. We find somewhere to throw that down, and you can see their roots all down in here. You can see their roots where they've rooted in to the medium, and this is just my sand and pine bark medium mix. And in order to pull these apart, just grab them and start shaking. And one thing that's really nice about arborvitaes is once you get them coming out of this sand, they come right out. They don't tangle up with each other real bad. Let me just give you some examples here of what we're getting out. So you just have to give them a shake, and look, these are dormant. We've had several hard freezes at this point, so you don't have to worry about being careful with them. There's you a couple of examples of green giant rooted cuttings. Okay, you can shake these, you're not going to damage them. Here's a really small one. Do you see that? I'd like to see bigger roots than that, but this was a really small cutting. So, you know, the smaller cuttings are going to turn into plants a little bit slower. And then you got one that's a little nicer, like that one. There's always some variation in them. So just continue pulling these out and just show you a few of them. You're gonna, you're gonna tear some roots as you go. Yeah, just get in there and shake the thing apart. Throwing sand all over everything. But they'll just come out. And you can just see them one after another. Some bigger than others. There's a really nice one there. Kind of a smaller one there. But I don't worry too much about big and small. I just try to get as many out of this as we can, because they're all going to grow. So in 1 year, here's what your propagation efforts might yield you. So something like that, a really nice one there. So I don't want to just focus on the really nice ones or the little smaller ones, because they're all rooted, and I'm really happy about that. So one thing I'm noticing here that I'm not seeing, I'm not pulling out a bunch of dead ones. So ones that just didn't root at all. I mean, there's always a few, but like here's an example right here of one that didn't root at all. So it's just one of those things where, if you stick 70 or 75 or whatever in there, you're going to have some that don't root, and that's fine. But doing these green giants like this in winter as hardwood cuttings, the way that I've really taken a liking to doing them, you just have almost none that are dead. I mean, 95% plus will root this way. So I don't know of a better way to do it. So this is how I do it. So we dug these out, and there are 75 of these here that were in that one tray. So I've maybe had 80 in it, maybe had 77 in it. I really don't know. That number always varies. But that being said, I only found maybe one other dead one in there. So super happy about the way these turned out. I'd say these are kind of the average size, maybe, something like that. There's some bigger, and there are some smaller, just to kind of give you an idea. And I'm showing you these because I want you to know what you can expect when you do this. So there's another one. Again, these don't all start out exactly the same. Some of them are a little further behind. Some of them are a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller when they get stuck in. So, if I had a more controlled environment, if I were doing this in a greenhouse, or if I were, more precise or had more expertise in this, I might could produce them so they all looked, virtually exactly the same. But I don't have any of that, and I do it how I do it, and this is how they look. But I'm really, really happy with it. So let me then show you the next step. Now the next step in this process, the way that I do it, is I use trade gallon pots to take the rooted cuttings and pot them into. You could get away with using about a 2-quart pot, which is a little bit smaller than a trade gallon. You could put these into full 1 gallons. I wouldn't go bigger than that, but this just seems to be a good size. And I just pot these in my regular potting soil, which is a mixture of pine bark and hardwood bark, or pine bark and peat. It's just some combination of that. And that's not exact. We've done lots of videos on potting soil. But that being said, I take these rooted cuttings and just fill up that pot maybe 2/3 of the way, something like that. It doesn't matter exactly. And then take that rooted cutting, sit it right down in there on top of that, and then fill in all around it really good. Compress it, and there you go. Now, at this point, it's, December now. Again, this is a year. This is 1 year after this was clipped from its parent plant and stuck in the sand. Then it rooted in the summer, and so it's been 1 year to get it to this point. And at this point, you can put fertilizer in this. It's not going to grow any because it's winter, but you can fertilize it now if you have a slow release to fertilize it with, or you can wait until about March to add your fertilizer. It just kind of depends on what you want to do with that. But I take all of these and I pot them up in these pots, and at this point you're going to take these pots and sit them out in the sun. You're going to put them out in your area where you irrigate your plants, whatever that looks like for you, and they need to sit out in the sun, and they need to do that for a full year. So after we pot our plants, we bring them out to this area. We just call it a grow out area, and it's where we just sit down all of our green giants. And you can see I'm kind of surrounded by green giants here, but just as an example, here's where they would be 1 year later. Now, this has actually been this size since about August or so, and this is usually when I start selling these. So we propagate them, say, this year, then the next year you grow them out, but by that fall, they are ready to start selling, and these sell really well at this size. This is oh, probably 20 inches tall in a trade gallon, one size pot. Very nice looking tree. The pot is really full looking, and you can start selling a ton of these things because people are real eager to get these and make them a privacy screen or just a property boundary between them and a neighbor, between them and a busy road, or whatever it is. So, you know, your larger rooted cuttings, you know, they may have been this tall by now. Some of the smaller, more puny ones, they may be this tall by this point. But this is just kind of an average one that we have. And this year, and I just mean in the last 12 months or so, we've sold about 1,800 or 2,000 of these now at this size. Some a little bit bigger, but probably 95% of the ones that we've sold are this size because people can buy a whole lot of them at a really good price. Now, one of the things that we like to do on pricing these is I like to advertise them in bulk. So I'll say if you buy 100 or more, I'll sell them to you for $5 each. Well, nobody else does that. You know, people can't get that deal anywhere else. And we sell quite a few plants to people who are coming to buy 100, 150, or 200 at a time. And, you know, we make good money doing that, and it's a really good deal for our customers who want to do that, or some other nursery comes and buys them from us for something like that. So we think getting them to this size in, I'm gonna say 20 months from the time you originally stick them in their propagation media, we think that that's pretty good. And just for some small nursery, small time bubbas like us, we're really glad to be able to do it. Now, to take it a step further, another thing that you can do if you want to take your plants from this size and from whatever your price point might be, you know, generally I sell these for about $8 a piece unless I'm selling them in bulk. This plant is now ready to be taken from this pot and potted up. And you can put it from here, you can put it in a 3-gallon pot or even a 5-gallon pot. And in a year from this, you'll have a tree that's something like this. So I think this one's actually a 5-gallon, and this one could stand to grow a little bit more in this pot. But you can see how fast these things grow. And by the time you go from, you know, the $8 tree into a tree like this, you know, you're getting into the 25, 35 and up from there in price. So it really just kind of depends on, you know, what kind of model do you want to follow, what kind of nursery do you want to be, who are your customers, or who are you trying to market your plants to, that kind of thing. But we want to have both. We want to have the small ones and we want to have the big ones. So I don't ever hold these, you know, I don't ever keep these and say, oh, we're not selling those now, we're going to grow them out. If I sell them all, I sell them all, and I'm happy to do it. But if we have them left over, or if we have some that are kind of an in-between size that don't really fill that pot out very well, we'll hold them over, let them get a little bigger, and they end up getting put in larger pots that we can sell for more money later. So, and we've done well selling these in these sizes when we've had them. So you really can't go wrong with them either way. So all right, guys, that's an overview of our process of how we do Green Giant Arborvitaes and kind of what the time frame is, how much we charge for them, and all that kind of thing. And like everything else that we do here, you always have to adjust that to your context and to your pricing, to your region. The cool thing about this is we do this with Green Giants and Emerald Green Arborvitaes as well, but, you know, depending on where you live and your region, your climate, you know, all that kind of thing, it may be a different tree that is the tree that you need to focus on for privacy screens. You know, maybe some sort of spruce or some sort of cypress or some combination of all of them that tends to be best in your area. But the best thing to do is just look around and see what people are growing and using for privacy screens in your areas if you're interested in trying something like this. So, you know, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's not going to make you $1 million, but it is a good way to make money growing plants. And we grow a whole lot of these, and every year it's more and more. So we look forward to having a great year with them this year and doing everything that we can to make it the best it can be. Well, guys, that's all for today's video. I appreciate y'all watching. I love y'all, and I'll see you on the next one.